All right. Hey, what up? I'm gonna make this like super fast. Would have loved to like go over EOCs in class with you guys, but kind of ran out of time because we had IMPs and all the other stuff. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna go through the EOCA document and then I'm gonna go through the EOCB documents. And basically, what this is gonna be is me kind of explaining to you, like ideally how you would have attacked these particular documents. Um, So yeah, I'm just gonna share my screen real fast, and then we'll get to it. Get to it. Um, blah, 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 blah. Bro, where's my share button? The recording buttons are now where my share button was, and this is awkward because it makes it seem like I don't know how to use a computer, and perhaps I don't. It's making me question everything I've ever done in my life. And right now, we're just yapping to fill time. Figured it out. All right. Bruh. Yes, yeah. Optimized video sharing. Yeah, who cares, dude? Share. Thanks. All right. So, here is the EOCA document. I'm gonna explain what like all these highlights mean, and you're gonna get. Sorry, I'm distracted because I'm also uploading a bunch of videos at the same time, multitasking. Anyways, you'll also get all these annotations. You'll probably see them as I'm sharing my screen, anyways. So, here's the thing about an EOCA. If you have ever looked, they suggest about 30 minutes. Here, I know you guys aren't going to be able to do it in 30 minutes. Not a lot of kids ever are. So here is the one thing I will tell you though. If you are going to excel at an EOCA response, you should be able to break down a document in about 16 minutes. And I'm going to explain to you exactly how to do that and exactly how much time you should be spending on each part. Um, it's not an exact science, so it may be more. It may actually even be less depending on the document you get. But I'm going to kind of break it down to you guys on how, like, if I had to do it in 16 minutes, I would have done it, and probably the best way to do it. Um, and maybe this will get us somewhere because you guys improved. So maybe we're taking steps in the right direction. Let's see if we can continue on that hot streak. You know what I mean? So, anyways, all right. So 16 minutes. The first 2 minutes, right? What you want to do is you want to try to locate the main argument. You're probably thinking, like, dude, how am I going to read this whole thing in 2 minutes? You don't. All right. Here's what you would do. The main argument is going to be in one of two places, and it may actually be in both. You're going to look over the first paragraph, and you're going to look over the very last paragraph. The main argument is going to be in one of those two paragraphs. It just is, right? It's the same thing as like when you guys go to write something, you make your main point in the beginning and you reemphasize your main point at the end. It's not going to be any different than that. So now, will all the parts of the argument be in the beginning or the end? Maybe, maybe not. Different documents, do different things, and they set their stuff up in different ways. Sometimes you'll find the main argument and all the parts in the intro. Sometimes you'll just find the main argument in the intro and in the conclusion. Um, the main parts or the parts of the argument would come when you find all the claims, but you will be able to locate the primary argument at least. So, 2 minutes, right? You're not actually going to read the intro and the conclusion necessarily like for depth, right? You're just looking through it, trying to see if you can locate what would look like an argument, right? Um, now, this particular paragraph, right? So the intro, this is something you should be able to do in 2 minutes time, right? 120 seconds, for sure. Uh, yeah, I mean, you guys know what an argument looks like. So, anyways, this particular one starts with this, right? This is evidence. By the way, a lot of people wrote that it was a claim in their EOCA response. It is not, right? So this is a fact, and a fact cannot be a claim. All right. And even though she doesn't like give any sort of like where she got this particular statistic, that part doesn't necessarily matter for this part of the EOCA response. Right now, we're just trying to determine like what the main argument is, what's a fact, what's a claim, that kind of thing, or what's a claim, what's evidence. Anyways, but this right here is evidence, right? So even though she doesn't give where she found it, it's still not an opinion, right? Um, it's just telling you like there's more of these buildings and the other buildings or whatever. So you would chalk this up as evidence. And even though it doesn't have to do with what you're looking for right now, I would probably mark that off real fast, right? Then as I read through this whole part right here, it very much so sounds like, okay, so this is the argument we're making. How do I know that? Because all of this is opinionated. All of it is like thoughts and feelings. None of it is evidence or anything like that. It's literally all, right, some sort of like think piece, I guess you could say. But anyways, um, it breaks it down into different parts too. So it's a, far from serving as uh wait, no, that's not the part that I want. Where's the equity of access? Bingo. Few American institutions strive for equity of access. That was one of the parts of the main argument. Uh, a core principle of the American Library Association, and even fewer pay more than lip service to the idea that services like the internet and necessary aspects of life that simply must be made and available to all members of society. But despite their impact and import, much of it hidden from people of means who can independently and often expensively secure for themselves those services provided by the library. Bingo. America is starving its libraries, cutting off millions of people from the stream of information that, like oxygen, powers the development and basic functions of society. This right here, right? So this whole long part is essentially the thesis, right? Now, is it all the parts of the argument? Yes and no. It's just not all together in order in that one sentence. The equity of access is part of it. This, like America starving its libraries, cutting off access of information to certain demographics of people is part of the argument. But this part right here, that is the main argument, right? And I end up figuring that out when I go to the conclusion, right? Because you get to chalk all this up as evidence because there's numbers and stuff like that, and I'll explain more about that in a second. But um, right here, bingo, this is an obvious claim, and so is this, right? Beyond mere fairness, there are viable economic reasons for sustaining New York City's public libraries. That's an opinion. And it kind of aligns with what was being set up here. So we know that we're probably emphasizing our main argument, right? So, and then ends on this, right? When you end an argument, you're going to want to end with something that has to do with your main argument. So, simply put, it's not just cruel to starve our libraries. And remember, we said starve libraries up here. So, we're recycling the same point here. And the communities that utilize them is bad for business and bad for America. Bada bing, bada boom. I now have an idea of what the main argument is, right? And you should be able to do that within like 2 minutes. Now, my explanation of it took significantly longer than 2 minutes, but that's because I'm trying to be as detailed as possible here. So, um, now let's talk evidence. After you do that, right? So I said 16 minutes. We've taken 2 minutes to try to locate the main argument. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to look for claims next? No. Here's the better way to do that, right? You're now going to take 7 minutes to look through the article. Notice how I said look through, not read through. Look through. And here are the exact things that you're going to look for. Anything that has numbers in it, anything that has quotation marks around it, anything that involves a name other than the author's name, because it's probably citing some sort of source. If you see professor of or doctor of something or like some sort of credentials, that's what you're looking for. Literally anything that looks like what would tag along with evidence is precisely what you're trying to look for, right? You're not reading it right now. You're just looking for it so you can highlight it and then move on because you're going to deal with the whole analyzing part of it later, right? So as I move through this, right, we already talked about this. Um, Immediately as I start scanning this document, right, I see 2010, right, and then I see Chicago Fox affiliates. I'm at this point, I'm not even reading all this stuff. I'm just highlighting until it looks like the evidence has stopped. I see that we have quotation marks here, so I'm still going. And then I see another number, okay, 60%. So I know that's going to be evidence right there, right? And then I'm not talking about claims yet, only talking about evidence. I know that this whole thing is probably evidence, right? I do see a number there, but 19th century era, blah, blah, blah. I'm not really paying too much attention to that. I know that I have evidence here, so that's good enough for me because I don't want to spend all my time highlighting everything just yet. Right. And then immediately I move down. All right, let's look at this paragraph. Immediately see a number. Okay, funding number. Okay, this is evidence since 2008. We're highlighting that, right? Another number. And then we see 2.8 million people, one third of city residents. All right, I'm seeing that this is probably going to be evidence, so I'm going to highlight it. If you go back and it ends up not being evidence, who cares? You don't get penalized for highlighting something that wasn't evidence, right? You only get penalized if you don't talk about all the evidence. So it's better to over like highlight and overmark than it is to not have all the stuff. So anyways, I move on, right? And then I see, 15.7 million. So whatever that's attached to, I'm going to highlight all of that. So yes, we're highlighting a lot of stuff, but then I move on, right? I don't really see anything there. And then I come down here, New York's, and then I see Mayor de Blasio, and then 1.4 billion. All right. And then quotation marks. Cool. This whole thing is probably evidence. mark it off. Then I move on. Immediately, as soon as I look at this, I see New York Times, right? Because it's italicized. This is definitely evidence, right? And then there's quotation marks as well. I'm moving on, right? And then I didn't even highlight this part, right? But can't make it to your local branch, 10 and 6 between, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait, no, it seems like an opinion. Not going to highlight it as evidence. Sometimes you see a number, you give it a quick look over, you're like, oh, no, not evidence, right? Anyways, moving on. This whole thing right here, I mean, it's chalk. It's chock full of numbers, right? So you got a bunch of numbers, 2010, a bunch of dollar signs. You got all these like dollar, 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 right? So if I'm you, I'm just gonna highlight this whole block, right? Because all of it has numbers in it. Boom, that's evidence, right? Now, I just explained that in less than 7 minutes. You probably could take a little bit more time, right? So when you locate it, give it a quick look over, and then utilize that 7 minutes. You have potentially all evidence marked off already, right? Now, yeah, 7 minutes left. What are you obviously going to do with that 7 minutes? Now you're looking for claims, right? Where are claims usually next to? Evidence, right? Where you find evidence, you're finding claims because what do you need the evidence for? To support claims, right? That's why we located the evidence first because just looking for claims, right, without reading some is going to be tough. Now, here's why I like the fact that we highlight evidence first. There's less to read, to look through, to find the claims, which is why you should be able to do it in 7 minutes because we're not reading the whole article to find the claims. Whatever is now not blocked off is kind of what we're going to look towards. So we go back up here. We've already talked about the main one, so we're not talking about that right now, right? If we marked all this off as evidence, there's got to be a claim in here somewhere, right? And then the quotation ends right there. So right here, it says it might be amusing to quip about musty 19th century era card catalogs and smudgy analog newspapers racked on giant spindles, but the access to contemporary society that public libraries provide is deadly serious. This is definitely an opinion, right? This is debatable. It's arguable. This is a claim. I highlight it. Only had to read one sentence to find it, and it's right there. Running out of breath, dude. All right, moving on. And here we marked off a bunch of stuff as evidence. So guess how easy this is going to be. Let me read this sentence and see if it sounds like a claim. Yet, despite their popularity, city libraries are literally falling apart. Boom. That's an opinion because there's going to be somebody who could argue that they're not falling apart, even though like you feel like you could look at libraries and they look dusty and dirty, right? That's subjective. What's dusty and dirty to you may not be dusty and dirty to somebody else, which is why you can't eat at everybody's house. I don't know if you've ever heard that thing. If you don't get the reference, it's fine. Anyways, this is a claim right here. So boom, I marked that off. We're moving right along. So, all right. Have this as evidence. This is the one where it gets a little tricky because there's a lot here that's not marked up. So if I'm you, I'm just going to start from the top here because I got the time to do it. So, all right. And claims where they usually sometimes in the beginning of a paragraph. So it's never a bad place to look. When you get these documents, it's not always the case, but we'll obviously start from the top of this. It's highlighted so you know what's coming. But anyways, while it would be wonderful to assume that all media are available to all New Yorkers at all times and that the only thing standing between us and the world is a sticky connection or a malfunctioning server, that simply isn't so, or this simply isn't so. This is a claim, right? It doesn't sound like a strong claim, and because it's not like a driving force in this article, but it is indeed a claim, right? And it's just reemphasizing the point that not all data and media is available to all New Yorkers at all times, right? Which is why they then used this particular piece of evidence from the New York Times, because we're using people in New York as an example because it's a major city, right? So anyway, but this is a claim. Then we're moving on. Remember, what also helps you with this is we're talking about access to stuff. And if you remember, part of the argument was equity of access right there. So you got to kind of piece those things together. Then moving on. We've talked about this already, but this is a claim, right? So I found that claim. I move on. This whole thing, remember, we marked it off as evidence, so don't have a lot to look at here. Does this sound like a claim? Beyond mere fairness, there are viable economic reasons for sustaining New York City's public libraries. That's debatable, right? Because there's people who don't want to support public libraries. So obviously there's people who don't think that they serve a purpose economically or a purpose at all. So this is definitely a claim because you can argue it. It's not a fact. It's debatable. Claim, right? This is also a claim, but we're saving this because it more so attaches itself to the main argument. But you could also mention it in the claims, like attached to the evidence, things like that in your Q2. Bada bing, bada boom. You now have marked off your claims and your evidence, and you have potentially the correct primary argument, and you do it in 16 minutes. Now, what does that leave you with? If you have mapped out the time properly and you've given yourself around about 45 to 50 minutes, you now have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 plus minutes to write this response. Mr. Hodge, how could I possibly do that? I'm just not a fast writer. Here's how you do it, right? You could save your Q1 for last if you want. If you want. That part's up to you. Here's where you got to kind of see what's right for you. You could write the Q1 first and then come back to it if you feel like you might have time at the end, but if you feel like you might not, then maybe you save it for the end. It's going to kind of depend on who you are as a human being. If I'm you, after marking all this stuff off and not having something that is dead set as the primary argument, I probably save my Q1 for last after I start writing about the claims because I feel like that'll give me a better idea of exactly how I want to phrase my Q1. But that's me. You might be different, okay? When you go to write the Q2, you've sat here and you're like, okay, I found the claims, but now how am I going to know what to write? Go one by one, dude. Okay, so you have this claim. So you're like, the author, what's the author's name, dude? Katrina Vanden Heuvel. You could say the author, or you could say the author's name, whatever you want to say, right? Makes their first claim, access to contemporary society. Excuse me. The access to contemporary society that public libraries provide is deadly serious. You could reword this if you want to, obviously, make it shorter, paraphrase it, but that's the author's first claim. What evidence does the author use to support that claim? This right here. You need to read that to be able to say that this is the evidence the author supported it with? No, you don't. You just need to look it over, right? You're going to scan it real fast and see what you're going to say. You know that you're going to talk about the author supports it with some sort of quote from the Chicago Public Library, Commissioner of the Chicago Public Library, Mary A. Dempsey, right? You know you're going to say that they supported it with that. Now, you're going to have to do a little bit of reading to say how it supported it. But if you look at the evidence and then you look at the claim, you should be able to quickly make a connection of how that particular evidence would be able to support that particular claim. Bada bing, bada boom. And now you're going to talk about like how that could potentially connect to the overall argument. And now you're probably going to say, well, Mr. Hodge, if I didn't write Q1, how am I going to connect it to the overall argument? You may not know all the parts of the argument just yet, but you know the main argument, right? You know that this author is arguing that America is starving its libraries. You know that the author is arguing that libraries are obviously vital pieces of society that provide equity of access to other individuals. You know those parts, right? So you can still write how it connects to the primary argument. You don't have to get super specific just yet about what the primary argument is. You just have to say what the connection is and how they connected it, all right? Then you're moving on. You have this claim right here. So the author makes their next claim. What evidence do they support it with? You have two pieces of evidence in this particular paragraph. You could talk about it. You could use those, right? Essentially, what I'm getting at here is instead of doing all this reading and annotating and marking up and then writing, you take that 16 minutes, you mark it all up, and then you start to like think and write at the same time, right? And you're just trying to move as efficiently as possible. Some of you will be able to make it more detailed. Some of you will have to make it simplistic. But remember, finishing and it being simple and like maybe too simple is better than not finishing at all. Okay. It's going to give you a better shot. So that's essentially how I would attack Q2. Then we move into Q3. Since we haven't necessarily read everything yet, but we do have a better idea because we just wrote Q2, I'd probably write my Q3 next. But if you feel like, okay, I need to make sure my Q1 is done, and since I've written about the claims, I probably have a better idea of what the overall argument is, go write the Q1. Then you go to the Q3. For me, I would probably attack Q3 second, only because Q2 and Q3 are both worth 5? How many points? 6. They're both worth 6 points each, so I want to make sure that those are definitely taken care of, because if I can write solid ones out of that, and then let's say I get like a 2 on the Q1, that's 1 point. I'd rather lose 1 point there than lose 2 points in the other two. You know what I mean? You got to think strategy here. So anyways, moving on. Then as I move through this, right, and I analyze, I'm going to analyze as I write about the evidence, right? So the things that you guys probably were missing, I would say the most, is this particular piece of evidence, like commissioner of the Chicago Public Library, that's cool. Definitely has some credibility, but also think about the subject area. A little biased potentially, right? Because she literally works for the library system. So she definitely supports libraries. So of course she's going to be in favor of you know, supporting libraries. But you just move through and you talk about the evidence, kind of read over it and write about it as you're looking over it. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And then you just, finish. You do that for the Q3, and then if you still haven't done Q1, obviously you finish your Q1. But how you attack this, kind of from a writing standpoint, is going to be up to you. I think the best thing to do, though, 16 minutes, you get it all marked up. That way, you at least know what everything is, right? You know you have the claims, you know you have the evidence, you know you got the main argument. So from there, you get to attack it kind of how you want. But how kids have had success in the past is doing it exactly like that, is making sure that you have everything set up before you even get started and you don't like read through it in detail. This is what I mean when I say read strategically. There's a phrase that chefs use. It's like mise en place, mise en place, mise en something rather. I don't know. It just means getting all of your ingredients in order and organized before you start cooking. That's essentially what you're trying to do here when you annotate this way. Is making sure that everything is ordered before you start writing, right? Or cooking, if you want to use that colloquial phrase that you guys use now, or brain rot, or whatever you guys call it now. I don't know. Let them cook, bro. I don't know. Is that even still a thing? Doesn't matter. This video is getting too long. All right, moving on. EOCB. EOCB, there's really no set tips or tricks I can give you, right? All I can explain to you is kind of how I would attack this and how other kids have attacked it and things like that to see potentially if you have more success. This is really not your guys' weaker area. Your EOCEAs are the weaker area, but we should still talk about this because they weren't the best this time. But let's just talk about it, right? So, first thing I would do if I were you and I had these four documents is obviously all four of them have a title. As an English teacher, I could tell you titles mean something, right? People don't just give articles or poems or stories or whatever. They don't just give them titles, they give them titles. Titles always mean something. So sometimes the title could give us information, sometimes it can't. First thing I do is I look through all the titles, right? So this one right here, what motivates employees more, rewards or punishments, that immediately gives me potential themes, and that's exactly what I would start writing down or typing out this particular document, right? Is the word motivate, so I know they're going to talk about motivation. I know they're going to talk about rewards or reward system. I know that usually goes along with some sort of punishment, and it also says the word punishment, and then praise versus criticism, because that's essentially what it's asking, right? So without even reading it, I have potential themes that are in that particular document. And as we now know, after reading it, those themes were indeed in that document. So moving on. Uh, it doesn't always work because this just says from Matthew 6, 1 6. And unless you've read the Bible, this kind of means nothing to you and it's not going to tell you anything, right? So you move on. Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Again, unless you've read that book, it's not going to tell you anything, right? So you move on again. And then luckily, this one does tell you something. 3 charts that show the gender gap among Nobel Prize winners. Potential themes definitely given to us: gender inequality, rewards and praise, because again, we're talking about prize winners, right? And we know the rewards tag along with the word praise. So I could write rewards and praise. And then, of course, if we're talking about gender inequality, we're talking about unfair treatment. So again, without reading that, I have potential themes that are definitely within that document. Look at that. I definitely already have a connection, source A and D, but I don't really like the look of this connection. So then what would I do next? All right, well, I already gathered themes, potential themes for this one. I'm still not going to read it yet. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to see what this bad boy is all about, and I'm going to read this. And it's short. Guess what? After reading it, it tells me it's all about completing tasks simply because it's the right thing to do, not to receive praise for it. That definitely relates to source A if my title reading was correct. So then what am I going to do? I'm going to write that stuff down, potentially talking about lack of integrity. And without reading the other document, I can make that potential issue connection in my brain. And then I go back up here, I read through this, I find out that I was correct and these things kind of tag along with it, and that these people were only washing their hands more because they were receiving some sort of like reward or praise for it, which immediately connects to this particular document right here. So my thought process of my potential argument being about a lack of integrity worked. And I didn't even have to read the other two. Now, if you're like, man, I think I'm going to need more evidence than just what I can get out of those two because I have to have 2 body paragraphs, guess what? Then you could go back through, you could scan through the other documents, see what you could find. This one definitely had evidence that could relate to that particular argument. Now, that's where a lot of you went wrong. And I think what a lot of you actually did is you didn't go wrong unintentionally. I think a lot of you went wrong intentionally as far as arguments go, and you decided I'm just going to sacrifice the 2 points in row one so I can have an argument rather than sit here for 30 minutes and try to think of an argument that doesn't directly come from one of the sources. Because a lot of you just talked about like it's better to like use rewards than it is to like criticize or something like that. You basically almost all had the same argument. So um that's how I would attack that. Now, maybe that helps you, maybe it doesn't. But there's your review for that. I'm gonna stop talking now because the video has gotten entirely too long, I'm sure. So okay, great. Bye, 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 bye.